Presentation of the findings of the research study focusing on the properties of sustainability performance measures, also known as KPIs. The study was conducted by Aldoni Ferreira and Prabhakar Thoradenia from Monash University. This study was funded by CIMA's Centre of Excellence Australasia, and as such, the support of CIMA is hereby gratefully acknowledged. The presentation will comprise of 5 subparts. Firstly, we will be providing a brief introduction and rationale for the study. This will lead to outlining the purpose of the study and a brief introduction on the research method. We will then move to the key findings, and this is where a little bit more time will be spent. And finally, we will draw the main conclusions of the study. So let us begin with the introduction and rationale for the study. Key performance indicators are ubiquitous and used for a multitude of purposes. The intrinsic properties of KPIs, however, are known to differ. That is what prior research suggests. It is also demonstrated by prior research that the measurement properties of KPIs impact on the purpose for which they are used. However, prior research has not looked at the particular characteristics of sustainability KPIs. So little is known about the measurement properties of this type of KPIs. Consequently, the purpose of the study is fourfold or are fourfold. Firstly, the first purpose is to analyze the measurement properties of sustainability KPIs. Secondly, it is to investigate the purposes for which sustainability KPIs are used. Thirdly, we want to examine the relationship between the measurement properties of KPIs and the purposes for which they are used. And finally, we want to examine the factors that impact on the measurement properties of KPIs. Now, we will be looking at both sustainability and general KPIs, but the focus will be on the sustainability component and comparing and contrasting with general KPIs. Which leads us to the question of how do we define these two types of KPIs, general KPIs and sustainability KPIs. That's what we turn our attention to next. So let us define general KPIs and sustainability KPIs. In corporations, we find financial KPIs, we find KPIs related to customer and operational aspects, which we refer here to as other KPIs. We find KPIs related to environmental aspects, which are related to consumption of inputs and environmental degradation. And we also find social KPIs, which are related to labor practices, human rights, and the like. For the purpose of this study, we classify financial and other KPIs as general KPIs, and we refer to sustainability KPIs as comprising of environmental KPIs and social KPIs. Next, a brief note on the research method. A two-stage approach was followed in this study. Stage 1, interviews. 20 interviews with performance management experts from a range of Australian companies were conducted. The purpose here was to obtain insights from field experts to assist in the design of a survey. So the next stage obviously was conducting the survey. The survey was mailed to 1,000 managers in senior positions, and we've received 117 usable responses, which corresponds to a usable or corrected response rate of 19%. Next to the key findings of stage 1. Generally, the concept of measurement properties was not well understood by practitioners. In fairness to them, however, we acknowledge that this is probably true to an extent when it comes to many academics. Secondly, we've noticed that interviewees found it difficult to identify the desirable and undesirable properties of KPIs. Very often, they refer to goal-setting practice or SMART goals to describe measurement properties. Now, the SMART goals goes back to George Doran's 91 article, where he talks about goals being, or the need for goals to be specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-related. And that's something that interviews come to very frequently when describing the desirable properties of KPIs. A number of interviewees highlighted the importance of culture as a factor that has an impact on the measurement properties of KPIs, whilst a number of other interviewees put emphasis on the importance of KPIs to establish a link between the actions of managers and the outcomes, the organizational outcomes. So we thought that was particularly insightful. Now, this first stage led us to one larger implication for practice, and that implication is that practitioners are likely to benefit from training in the developing area of measurement properties of KPIs. Let's look now at the key survey findings. Firstly, by looking at how intense is the use of different KPIs. Obviously, we've asked questions about social KPIs, environmental KPIs, financial KPIs, and other KPIs. And quite clearly, the financial KPIs and other KPIs, which we refer to as general KPIs, are by and large most used more intensively. There's no two ways about it. We do find that 79% of companies use sustainability KPIs, but only a handful of them really use them to a significant extent. The sustainability KPIs are less used than general KPIs, and that's fairly obvious from this particular graph that we have here on display. Next, to the purposes for which KPIs are used. Now, we've asked 9 purposes, and here they are presented in order of the frequency to which they are used for those purposes. So clearly, the most the purpose for which general KPIs are most usually used are controlling and attention directing, and at the other extreme we have them being least used for social legitimacy and compensation purposes. In regards to sustainability KPIs, they are mostly used for controlling and compliance, and to a large extent also to attention directing purposes, and they are least used for compensation purposes. So if we put these two side by side, that is general KPIs and sustainability KPIs next to each other, we find that general KPIs are systematically ahead or at par with sustainability KPIs in terms of the extent to which they are used. There are two areas where sustainability KPIs appear to be a bit ahead, but statistically speaking, those differences are not significant. So they are effectively at par with each other. To answer the question, does it matter? We need to look at performance. So performance is defined in the study across 2 dimensions. On the one hand, we have conventional business performance, which comprises elements of financial, customer, operational, and innovation. And on the other hand, we have environmental, employee, and community performance aspects, which are embedded in a construct we refer to as sustainability performance. So next, we look at how participants have rated their performance of their businesses, both in conventional terms and sustainability terms. And in this particular graph, we've realized that we observe that conventional performance exceeds sustainable performance. But we can also see that companies that do well in one area, they tend to do well in the other areas. That is, there is a positive correlation between the two aspects. But no question that business performance, conventional business performance, is ahead of sustainability performance. So now to the question of the use of KPIs and how this relates to performance. Our analysis shows that the use of general KPIs positively correlates with conventional business performance, but not with sustainability performance. In contrast, the use of sustainability KPIs correlates positively with sustainability performance, but not with conventional performance. Further analysis shows that this derives from their use for decision-making purposes and performance evaluation and control purposes. So, all in all, the results suggest that the use of sustainability KPIs is a necessary condition for enhancements in sustainability performance. And consequently, this leads to our second implication for practice. And that second implication is that companies seeking to enhance their performance in the area of sustainability will not achieve these enhancements by using general KPIs alone, only through the use of sustainability KPIs. We next turn our attention to the measurement properties of both general KPIs and sustainability KPIs, beginning with general KPIs. Our study surveyed 9 properties, from reliability, validity, verifiability to cost effectiveness and noisiness, just to name a few. We find that the properties that are more commonly attributed to general KPIs are reliability, validity, and verifiability. And at the other extreme, we find that the least reported issue or attribute of general KPIs is noisiness. Next, we compare the measurement properties. We look at the measurement properties of sustainability KPIs, and here again we find a similar pattern compared to general KPIs, although the spread is not as pronounced as seen before. This perhaps can be more clearly shown by putting general KPIs and sustainability KPIs side by side. So when we put the two side by side, we can more clearly observe that general KPIs are systematically ahead of sustainability KPIs in terms of their measurement properties. We observe that general KPIs possess many desirable properties such as reliability and validity, but they also have some noisiness problems, and we find that the sustainable KPIs also have desirable properties, but these are more tied up to noisiness. Both general KPIs and sustainable KPIs have good and less than good attributes associated to them. So this leads us to our third practical implication. And the practical implication is that the noisiness of sustainability KPIs should not deter companies from their use. All KPIs, general and sustainability, suffer from this problem. They all have issues with noisiness. So perhaps not placing too much emphasis on the noisiness will help companies progress in terms of the quality of the KPIs as they use more of these types of KPIs. In this next part, we will introduce you to the conceptual model that we have followed in this study, and we will provide you some preliminary, and we emphasize the word preliminary, analysis of the relationships of interest. We begin by focusing on the conceptual model. The conceptual model looks at a range of contextual factors or organizational factors, as we describe elsewhere, and how these relate to the measurement properties of KPIs. And essentially, when we talk about measurement properties, which have been outlined previously, there were 9 properties we have considered. 8 of these we consider them to be desirable, things like reliability, validity, and so forth. And one of them is unreliable, is undesirable, better still, which is noisiness. Noisiness indicates a lack of precision, and lack of precision is obviously not something companies want to have in their KPIs. So we have our organizational factors, we have the measurement properties which have been classified as desirable and noisiness being undesirable. And next we have the uses of KPIs and the purposes for which these KPIs are used. Now previously I've outlined to you 9 different purposes, but the 9 different purposes are for the purpose of the multivariate analysis regrouped into 4 different purposes. So they have been reclassified. The purposes are attention directing, performance evaluation and control, decision making, and finally legitimacy and compliance. So we have then our organizational factors, measurement properties, use of KPIs, and finally we have firm performance, which I have already outlined to you in the previous slides. Now the model predicts that the organizational factors have an impact on the measurement properties of the KPIs. It then goes on to predict that these measurement properties will impact on the purposes for which KPIs are used, and ultimately this will have repercussions for firm performance. Now that the conceptual model has been introduced to you, we can move on to the preliminary findings of our research. First, we focus on the relationship between organizational factors and the measurement properties of KPIs. So we focus on the left-hand side of the conceptual model. The first observation, the first finding is that the factors that have an impact on the measurement properties of sustainability KPIs are the exact same factors that influence general KPIs. So we will be introducing the evidence or the findings of these together because they are effectively common. Firstly, we find that IT sophistication has a positive impact on the desirable properties of KPIs. So the more sophisticated the IT system is, the more companies are able to report good qualities of the KPIs they use. And this applies to all types of KPIs as noted before. Secondly, we observe that a quantitative culture, something we explain in more detail in our written report, enhances the desirable properties of KPIs, but this leads to a subdued increase in noisiness. So it has overall a beneficial effect, but it's not only beneficial effect that comes out of a culture that emphasizes measurement and measuring performance. Thirdly, in regards to strategy, we observe that companies following differentiation strategy suffer a little bit from their ability to measure things with good qualities. So the impact of differentiation is somewhat favorable on the desirable properties, but this is more than offset by an increase in noisiness of the KPIs they use. So all considered, the impact is unfavorable. As for size, the impact is even-handed. It has a favorable impact on desirable properties, and at the same time, size leads to on average, greater noisiness. So it sort of plays on both sides of the scale. Finally, in terms of industry, and in particular where companies belong to sustainably sensitive industries, we find that this has an unfavorable impact on the desirable properties of KPIs. All other factors were found to have no effect on the measurement properties of KPIs. Continuing with the preliminary analysis, we now focus on the relationship between the properties of KPIs and the purposes for which KPIs are used. So we focus on the center part of our conceptual model. We find that with regards to the desirable properties, there is a positive association with the use of KPIs for all key purposes, and this is true for both sustainability KPIs and general KPIs. In regards to noisiness, we have different findings. Now, for sustainable KPIs, the noisiness has a negative impact on their use for performance evaluation and control purposes. But for general KPIs, the noisiness is not a deterrent for the use for any of the purposes considered. Thus, what this indicates to us is that managers are less forgiving of the shortcomings of sustainability KPIs than they are of general KPIs. And this leads us to our fourth implication. Now, the fourth implication for practice is that practice makes it perfect. So more tolerance for the weaknesses of KPIs appears to be advised. Finally, a brief note on the relationship with performance. So on the right-hand side of our model, we performed some analysis, but unfortunately the preliminary analysis is largely inconclusive. So we need to do a bit more time to do further study into our data. So I'm sorry we cannot provide you more details at this stage. Which leads us to the final stage of this presentation, which is, of course, the conclusions of the research, the key conclusions of the research. So what are the key conclusions? 4 points we would like to highlight here. Firstly, that to enhance sustainability performance, companies need to use sustainability KPIs. General KPIs are not sufficient. The second point, the second conclusion, is that all KPIs, and this means general KPIs and sustainability KPIs, suffer from the noisiness problem. And so noisiness should not deter companies from the use of sustainability KPIs, since it does not deter them from using general KPIs. The third finding or conclusion is that a quantitative culture impacts favorably on the properties of KPIs by enhancing the desired properties more than it enhances noisiness. So perhaps moving towards that direction is the way to go if the performance measurement is to be enhanced. And finally, we note that the concept of measurement property is not well understood and is frequently misinterpreted as smart goal setting. And so we draw the conclusion that practitioners are likely to benefit from training in this particular area. So those are the 4 conclusions of our study. If you would like more information, please go to the following website and download the participant report. There you'll find a little bit more detail on the findings and some of the conceptual definitions that I've explained in the presentation. Thank you.